This is Todd Neef. Welcome to Todd Neef's show, where I speak to interesting people and try to learn something about how they think about the world, mental models that they use, interesting tidbits about stuff that they're good at. And this time we're speaking with Preston Weippert from A Feather and Bone. And as we discussed a little bit in this interview, Like Rats played with A Feather and Bone several years ago at this point in Baltimore. And even though I don't really know the folks in this band prior to speaking with Preston today, always felt somewhat of a kinship with them, because I think that, you know, when I saw them in 2013 or whenever that was, I was like, oh, cool, these guys are doing something really interesting. Definitely metal vibes with some hardcore aspects, which I think is relevant to the kinds of music that I play as well. And since then, they've gone on to become pretty much a straight up death metal band, somewhat similar trajectory to Like Rats. So definitely relate to that changing in style and the music that they're creating. And I think that their record that they put out last year called Sulfuric Disintegration is one of the best records of the year. It's fantastic. So I really wanted to speak with them about that, about the songwriting process, which involves a lot of improvisation, which is not normal for death metal. So really interesting to hear about that. And also Preston is heavily involved with ambient music, making it, releasing it, noise music. So some of the more esoteric and inaccessible genres around. So wanted to get some feedback from him on how people can potentially learn to appreciate some of the more challenging sounds when you start to dive into, you know, power electronics and industrial influenced soundscapes. So he has some pretty good insight there. So enjoy this conversation with Preston Weippert. So I figured we could start with the question that everyone who is interested in death metal drumming is wondering about, which is it cheating to do a 2-foot blast?
Oh man, that's a good question. So a couple of years ago, I would say, no, you know, when you're drumming really fast, you've got, you know, stamina. It helps you like kind of keep going through the set. But as we've been writing, A Feather and Bone's last record, I have just found that like when you do single foot blasts, like you get more intensity. And so I wouldn't necessarily call it cheating, but I think that it's worth the challenge to try to do single foot blasts. Definitely.
Okay, so not like full on cheating, but maybe like selling yourself short a little bit if you go double foot.
You could do better.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I mean, I think I saw some other interviews where you were mentioning that some of the new material that A Feather and Bone has recorded in the last few years has like really pushed you in your drumming. So did you used to be a 2-footer and now you're like, you know what, I just have to suck it up and figure out single foot?
Oh yeah, honestly, like I was a 2-footer for a while, and you know, it's funny because like sometimes you're on tour, you know, and some people will be like, "Oh, you doing 2-foot blasts? Oh, you're cheating, man." You know, after a while, you kind of are like, "All right, cool. Let's work on this. Let's practice it." You know, and yeah, I mean, there's just something that feels great about accomplishing it, you know, and just like holding that stamina the whole time too. I mean, it's great.
Sure. So it was the shaming of your peers that pushed you to try to improve.
Yeah, let's say that was a big part of it.
Okay, that's cool. So in terms of trying to work on drumming stuff, is that one of the things that you know, you had to prioritize? You're like, okay, I'm gonna really figure out single foot blasting. Was that only through A Feather and Bone material, or were you kind of like, all right, I'm gonna do click track, I'm gonna play Morbid Angel records? Like, what was the situation?
No click track, always Morbid Angel records.
Okay, cool.
But a lot of it has just been in A Feather and Bone practice. I mean, when we're in there and we're writing, we're in there. We're in there all day. We'll get some pizzas delivered. We'll take a break. We'll eat some food, and then we'll just go right back at it, you know. And we won't leave until all of us are satisfied with something that you know, we hear. And definitely, you just keep going. You just keep like pushing yourself. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. So you guys, I mean, this is something I did want to ask you about, is that you kind of jam your songs out, right? It's like, okay, like you said, you're locking yourselves in there, and it's like, all right, we're just going to play these riffs and see what comes out. Is that kind of the process?
Oh yeah. It's actually a little bit more grueling than that even. So we'll come in and it's always all three of us every practice. There's never a time where like one of us isn't there. And
yeah, no one gets oh, I have to work, or I'm tired or whatever. Everyone's
nope,
always there.
no excuses. We're always there. And it's kind of funny. So Alvino will be, kind of just hanging out for a while. And Dave will be like, working on a riff, or he'll be like, I had this idea. I want to start a song fast, right? And so he'll just play a riff, right? Like an improvised riff, and I'll start drumming over that. And then we'll kind of see where it goes naturally, right? Like everything kind of starts in 4/4, but things get kind of changed. And that's like a very, very rough outline for how a song's going to start. And then from there, we'll be like, all right, cool, that sounded good, or no, that didn't sound good, or like, what does a song need after you play like, 8 bars of like blasts, like where's a good place to go that has dynamic? So we'll be writing, and then we'll be rewriting, and then we'll be rewriting the rewrites. And then we'll just be like putting things together. We'll be taking riffs from like a song we scrapped like 2 or 3 months ago and put them in like a song that we're working on, because like, oh, hey, this fits, There's really no rhyme or reason, but it's always just kind of worked, which has been pretty funny, because that's the only band I've ever been in that works like that either. Dave and I just are really in tune with each other. We both like the same music. We both come from really similar backgrounds in music too. So we always kind of know what we want something to sound like, and then it just kind of sounds like it, which is cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I've never been in a band that just jams like that. Right? Almost every band I've ever been in, there's one person who's probably the main creative force, let's say, and then there's usually a few other people who have some ideas, and usually someone comes with something that's like, hey, here's this riff, here's how this goes, we're going to do this 4 times, then we're going to do a transition that sounds like this, and then we're going to play this part, and then I'm not sure what comes next, but we'll just try what we have, right? There's not a lot of like, oh, like I'll just start playing drums and you just do something over it. So that's really interesting to hear that seems to work well for you guys.
Yeah, it's funny. I've tried to actually apply that method in some other bands that I play in from time to time too. And it's funny because like in other situations, you really do need to have that person who comes in with those ideas, who's like, hey, I've got this riff, like this is how it goes. Try to do this over it. And then we'll kind of go from there, and then I've got this bridge. And then from there, we'll maybe go back into this other part. It's always kind of like that in other bands. So it's pretty interesting to me too, but yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious what level of it is pure improvisation and what level is, okay, I'm coming with at least an outline of an idea and then we're going to kind of develop it as a group, right? Because I think those are slightly different, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, there's always a level of improvisation in there for sure. General outlines are, they tend to be like the same for us in a way, our band has really used a whole lot of Morbid Angel as the outline.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so we really go with just like, this is what we like. And, the music that we like does this. Let's see if we can put our spin on that,
Yeah, and so do you use Morbid Angel as an outline from like a song structure perspective, or like, oh, we should have a part that sounds like this part on Blessed Are the Sick, or what's the...
It's mostly like the parts. Sure. Outlines like are pretty vague, but definitely like parts, like in our last album, Sulfuric Disintegration, there's a few parts where Dave's like, all right, we're going to do like a Morbid Angel kind of style solo in this one part, that's like sounds like this one part in like Chapel of Ghouls or something,
Yeah,
and
totally.
So we'll definitely like take pieces and like put them in the framework of like a Feather and Bone,
Yeah. No, that's funny that you mentioned Morbid Angel, because I mean, I think every death metal band is probably influenced by Morbid Angel, either directly or indirectly. But at least the things that I was hearing were more like Incantation and Immolation. I would have guessed that would have been much more the primary influences.
We get a lot of that too, which I have nothing against either. I think that those bands are great. It's kind of a smorgasbord of a lot of that like kind of old school sound, you want a little bit of that like high like gain, and a bit of that kind of raw edge, so it doesn't sound like too warm,
Yeah, totally. So I guess I'm curious to push you a little bit more on what the improvisation process looks like. So, I mean, if you think about like jazz or blues players, typically there will be, okay, we're going to play these chord changes in this key. And so everyone sort of has an idea of the harmonic structure that they're going to play over, right? Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to create a similar structure in death metal, although you can sort of, show each other the riff and be like, yeah, it's 1, 1, 4, 5, 6, right? Those are the notes that we're going to be playing here. So is there an element of like, okay, we want to try to create, a harmonic structure and then build from that? Or is it just more like we want a part that sounds like this, quote unquote, if that makes sense?
It's, I think it would be more the latter for us. Like Dave always has an idea of what he wants something to sound like, and so the way he tells me that is he'll play something and he'll be like, it won't be this exact riff, but we should do something that sounds like this in this key, and it always tends to, change a little bit from there. But I think that's like, it is kind of hard to like really nail down, but more or less like that's kind of how it goes. It's so organic, Yeah. And like while we might have an idea for the part wanting it to sound a certain way, oftentimes we'll find ourselves in the position where it doesn't sound like that at all when it's done. We will change so much, or we'll have added something in there that wasn't there before, that the initial intention, might be vaguely buried in there somewhere, but it's got a whole new life to it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, hearing you describe the process, it almost sounds like the way that people will typically write essays, right? Which is like, okay, I have a vague outline of what I want. I'm going to kind of vomit some words out, and it's going to be grammatically incorrect and not make sense. And then I'm going to read it and move some stuff around and try to make the sentences work. And then someone else is going to read it and they're going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, so I have to change stuff, right? So it sounds almost like that process. And something that I'm curious about is that, at least for me, if anyone saw the sort of first draft of something, like I'm like, don't look at my computer. Like I'm trying to like block the screen, like get out of here. Don't even read this, right? Like I'm not prepared to show someone, it doesn't need to be done, but at least like, I feel like I have to go through a few iterations before I want anyone looking at any of my stuff, whether it's writing or music or whatever. So do you have that impulse, or is that just like gone at this point?
Oh no, that's very much there. Not a lot of people know, but this album actually was a rewrite of a whole nother album that we had written. And, we have scrapped so many songs to get to where we're at now. And I think, in the entirety of Sulfuric Disintegration, right, there's 6 songs. You've got probably parts of, like, I would say, like, up to, like, 10 songs in those songs that made it into the record formally, because like we will have a song that's got this really cool part, and then it's got a bunch of other stuff that we would just call like filler. It doesn't have anything, no substance, no dynamic. And so it is very much rough draft, like, that whole record is like, we've got the videos, we record every practice to make sure that we remember the things that we...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, to take the parts that we like and know what we don't like. And that's just like, it's kind of funny, I wouldn't want anybody to hear those songs. I'm really happy with where we're at now, but like to get there, it was a grueling process. So yeah, very much the same way.
But that shyness doesn't seem to exist between band members, right? Because even amongst band members, like I there's a threshold below which I don't even want to show people stuff, right? It's like, okay, this idea isn't ready for anyone to even understand that it might exist.
I think once upon a time, perhaps, but all of us have known each other for so long, and Dave and I have been playing music for a very long time together. So it's kind of that thing now where it's just like, he'll maybe do a riff that he thinks is stupid, and he'll just stop and he'll laugh and he'll be like, God, that was so dumb. And I'll be playing a drum part and I'm like, I don't know why I did that. That's stupid. It just, it's a lot of like, when you're playing with your friends, it's all in good fun, and that's why we do the band too. This is fun for us, as much as it is like a job, We love the whole process.
Yeah, totally. So let me ask you about the record that you scrapped. So if you have a bunch of ideas and they're kind of organized in some way and you're not totally happy with it, I think it can be difficult to then recontextualize those ideas, right? Where it's like, I can only hear in my head this riff going to the one that I don't even like. And I know I don't like the second part, but I can't pull myself out of that pattern. So did you guys experience that as a challenge at all? Or was it easy to just be like, okay, these are the good parts, scrap the bad parts, fill something else in?
It was kind of difficult at first, because you have those ideas of like, oh, well, then this goes into that next part that we weren't really happy with. But it quickly changed for us, and a lot of it is because of Dave too. Dave will show up and, he's like, all right, this is this part we had, but check this out. Here's like a riff that I think sounds better. And he'll just come up with something that blows my mind. And I'm just like, yeah, that's way better. Let's do that. And then instantly that's like cemented, it's just like, cool. Muscle memory. That's like where we're going next, and it sounds better. And so it's easier to kind of visualize that and not get like mixed up with like what we had before.
Yeah, for sure. And what was the issue with the previous stuff? Was it just going in a direction that you didn't like, or was it sounded like you said maybe it was just more filler? Like what was the complaint, let's say?
So the main complaint I would say is maybe Dave wasn't happy with some of his riffs. And then in there, I wasn't happy with some of my drumming. And it wasn't going in a direction that I would say is different from how we sound. I think on a very base level, like they're fine. But to us, we have higher standards than what we put out before. That's always the goal, like we're trying to push ourselves. So if we put out something, if we write something that sounds like something we would have done before, it doesn't necessarily feel like we're progressing, right? So there might just be like, 16 measures of just straight blast beats, which is like, yeah, that's great. We love blasts, but also it's like, where's the dynamic in that? Is that like 16 measures just to take up time, or does it add to the song? And so that's very much like what we would call like the filler. It doesn't have anything that would make us want to listen to it. There's no hook. It's just there. And you don't need that.
Yeah, I think it's easy to fall into that with death metal songs as well, right? Where it's like, oh, we need a fast part. Here's some trem riff that I came up with that we can just play, and it's fast, and it's not particularly good. It's not particularly bad, but it fills the spot that we need to be filled, and we'll move on to something else. And so, yeah. Exactly.
It's easy to do, and that's like a trap you got to watch out for. You don't want to do what's easy. You want to do what is challenging and what is going to end up with the best result.
Yeah, I think this combination of sort of jamming stuff out, but then simultaneously holding yourself to a high standard and editing, especially all of that being done as a group, is a really interesting dynamic, right? Because if you think about a lot of other bands, like a lot of bands come out strong with one or two very good albums, and then they put out like a bunch of terrible stuff. And then when you sort of read some interviews or know a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes, it's like, oh, these first two records, they really had something to say. They workshopped this stuff. They were practicing all the time. Then their later stuff, everyone moved to different cities. They were still touring, but they weren't actually working together on anything. They showed up to the studio with like a few riffs, but basically wrote the record in the studio. And then they just put something out that like isn't any good because no one ever was like, hold on a second. Does this make any sense? Did we actually work these songs out in a way that makes them, catchy, or like, do we have a bunch of filler, or was this just some random idea that we recorded and we're like, yeah, that seems cool, we need another song, like we should throw it on. So I think that the combination of like jamming and editing as a group is like fascinating. And I don't know if I even have a question from that, but I guess just react to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, my reaction is you want to be honest. You want to be honest with what your intention is. You want to be honest with why you're making music. And for us, showing up every day, every week, knowing that like all of us are here in it and we're all in it for the same reasons and we all have the same goals means that we're gonna keep putting out stuff that we like. I think that all of us have an agreement where it's like the moment that we feel we're not being like true to ourselves and we're trying to be something we're not, or we're not having fun anymore, then it's just it for us, and we had a good run and then we'll call it. And fortunately, we haven't reached that point yet, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think beyond just like a progression in sound, right? In terms of changing styles a little bit throughout your albums. I mean, I think that they're very clearly getting better, which is really interesting because I think for a lot of bands, it's actually the opposite, that they start strong and then kind of like taper off, and to see like, oh, you know what, this process is getting refined, and hearing you talk about like scrapping a whole album's worth of material because it wasn't up to standard, and then putting out, what I think is by far your best record based upon that material. Like that's a really cool, just like arc and progression to see.
Well, thank you. And also I think that one thing that I also like to touch on too is that, we might get some people asking us, like, hey, Bestial Hymns and Sulfuric Disintegration both sound, they're similar, but there's a change, like what's that change about? And even before, whenever Bestial Hymns came out, they're like, what's this change about? I think that it's just like any band. We've been a band for about 10 years, maybe a little longer than that. It's kind of hard to keep track. But when you're first starting out, you're having a good time. You're getting a feel for like, what kind of music you want to play, what you're doing. And Dave and I have always had this kind of like power violence, grindcore influence at the base of everything we do, And so it was a matter of like taking that and figuring out like, cool, like we're going to write some songs, and then we're going to write some more songs, and we're going to kind of see how things go. And so I would describe like the way that our albums have like progressed, we would say, or changed to some other people, is just that like, we've been more focused with our intention. We've been more sure of what we're doing and where we want to go. And so that's something that I think is really important to know, and also like good for like any band that's out there starting out too. Whenever you're starting a band and you're writing songs, like it's great and it's fun, and the longer you do it, the more it's naturally going to take a life of its own, and that's the best part of it. I think that's something that not a lot of people always realize.
Yeah, for sure. That is something I wanted to ask you about as well, because Like Rats has had at least a somewhat similar transition, right? Of starting kind of a more, at least partially hardcore influenced, but still, I always thought of us as a metal band, and then becoming much more straight up death metal. And similarly, it's not like, oh, what's this transition about? It's kind of like, well, this is just what started to come out, right?
Totally.
You're just writing songs, and then stuff starts to happen. And then at some level, you have to react to the stuff that you're doing.
Oh,
right?
Totally.
Where it's like, oh, okay, well, I wrote 3 songs that sound like this, and so now this whole space is open, so we're going to write more songs that sound like that. It's not like, oh, here's the next move. It's sort of reactive to whatever riffs start to come out.
Yeah, I mean, when you're around like when you're around death metal, when you're around like anything, doom, grindcore, like those things are going to influence you, and it's going to show up in your music. It definitely has for us. I think that this is probably the truest we've ever been to ourselves, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I can speak for Like Rats and say that our primary influence has always been Celtic Frost, right? That's my favorite band. And, our earliest stuff, which is like a little bit more punkish, I was kind of like, okay, I want to write songs that sound like the punk aspects of Celtic Frost.
Hell
right.
Yeah.
And then that, sort of puts us in a certain lane. And then, when you write stuff that's still more death metal, it's like, well, I'm still really trying to write a song that sounds like Procreation of the Wicked. And, depending on exactly how you chop that up, it might sound to people more like a Morbid Angel song. It might even sound to people, they're like, oh, this sounds like Hatebreed. And you're like, well, I mean, I guess not really, but like, I understand why you might think that. But
totally.
a lot of it is coming from a similar spot, just filtered through, slightly different aesthetics, let's say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's working well for you guys too. I mean, keep at it.
Yeah.
It's fucking sick. Celtic Frost is also amazing. I think every band should try to sound like Celtic Frost.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that they're, I do remember the first time I listened to Celtic Frost when I was probably like 15 years old or whatever, right? You hear of these bands, and this is back in the Napster days, and you're like, oh man, Celtic Frost is supposed to be like so awesome and so heavy. And then you download something and you're used to, like modern production, like super heavy, like crazy sounding stuff. And then you hear this like kind of thin, like whatever, like demo quality recording, and you're like, this isn't heavy at all. What's going on? And it takes a while to sink in.
Yeah, it takes you back. That's for sure. I love that. That's like that's always like what was so cool to me about like kind of like first wave like black metal bands too. You know, it's like the imagery was like, that's what attracted me at first. I'm like, this is evil, this is crazy, and you listen to it, and the recording quality like takes you back for sure, you know. But then that becomes a part of like why it's good. It's raw, it's off time, it's great, you know. It's like screeching in parts, it's like hard to listen to, and it's just like, oh, this is real, this is sick.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'm curious. I mean, you started to talk about just, you know, at least partially transitioning styles, but still retaining that that rooting and like grind, you know, power violence, all that kind of stuff. My initial take on A Feather and Bone, because we played together at that A389 Fest.
Yeah, I remember.
Was that 2013?
You know, I don't remember what year it was. All I remember is that that was the coldest tour I've ever been on.
Oh, yeah. That's, I do remember that was an unpleasant time to be driving around in a crappy van. Not ideal.
It was cold, but nonetheless, great. That was an awesome tour.
Yeah, but 2013 plus or minus a year probably. Yeah. And my initial vibe was like, oh, cool. These guys are like kind of crusty, kind of death metal. I'm into this. Is crust a part of what you're doing as well, or is it much more from the like grind aspect of things?
It was definitely a lot to do with crust. Whenever Dave and I first started hanging out, we talked about like how much we loved like His Hero Is Gone, Tragedy. I remember one time I have this distinct memory of Dave and I driving in my old truck, and I was like, yo, have you ever listened to this band Oroku? And he was just like, holy shit, dude, like, yeah. Like, and we were just like listening to bands like that, and like Fall of Ephrafa, like just getting down on like the crust and the D beat. And that's very much influenced our band for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Because I do think that something that's interesting for bands that kind of straddle the line between hardcore, death metal, black metal, crust, etc., is that, you know, these genres like have sort of crossed over in a lot of different ways, which is interesting, right? I mean, we're talking about Celtic Frost, and you sort of can easily hear Celtic Frost being influenced by Venom, being influenced by Battalion of Saints. You know, Discharge very clearly laid out the blueprint for a lot of that kind of like thrash metal transitioning into death metal, into black metal, etc. And then at some point those genres became separate, and then they crossed back over again, where then you have hardcore bands lifting mosh parts from metal bands, and then moshing became kind of like this hardcore thing. And there's just like this really strange back and forth. And I think at least for me, you know, I'm more interested in like the idea of touching on a lot of that stuff before it became crystallized into specific genres. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, given the variety of influences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, in this day and age, it's hard for things not to be a smorgasbord of styles and influences, you know, and like you listen to like any older band too, compared to like, you know, modern bands that are coming out, and you'll just find that there's so many similarities, you know. And I would agree with you, like early Celtic Frost is just like, it's got this punk vibe. It's just like, it sounds like so much more like a punk record, like a really raw punk record, you know? And that's kind of what I love about it. Everything just kind of like melds into one another. And also it's like, it kind of has to, you know, like a lot of this music is getting pretty old, and there's a lot of bands always popping up, and like everybody comes from different backgrounds, you know, they find their way into this kind of music through various routes. And I think it's awesome, you know, I think it's cool because it expands like the territory for all of these bands. You know, you can have like bands that could play with like thrash bands and like hardcore, and then like death metal or black metal, and you've got like hardcore bands, you know, playing with like death metal bands too, you know. You've just got this like kind of mix, and all of it kind of works harmoniously in a way, you know. So I think it's great that you're able to expand your band into like different markets now because of that kind of influence from all these different genres.
So I want to jump back and ask you some more questions about this improvisational songwriting, because I think it's so fascinating.
Let's do it.
Yeah. How do you know when a song is done? Is it like everyone's like, yep, cool, we got it? Or is there someone who makes the call, or what's the final cut decision look like?
There's a couple different ways, right? So one practice will be writing a song maybe for like 4 or 5 hours. And then we'll know it's done when we are able to play through everything we have so far and then feel like, all right, that last part kind of worked as an outro. Let's just like, let's blast it out for, like four, 8 measures, call it good. We'll record it and then we'll listen to it and then we'll come back to the next practice and we'll be like, all right, this is what we had. It was like done, but it wasn't done. So let's go back in and let's see how we can make that better. Then we'll actually like change up the ending. And sometimes that ending won't even be an ending. It'll just be a bridge to another part that eventually goes to an ending. So I would say like after we've rewritten a song 2 or 3 times, it's done. And even then, if we kept working it, I think recording is kind of the process where we're just like, all right, now the song has to be done because we've recorded it.
Unless you decide, the record isn't good enough and you're just going to scrap it for parts and do it again.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's funny. It might seem maniacal to a lot of people, but, we're all perfectionists. Dave's a madman on the guitar. And then like I am not satisfied if I feel like any part of what I'm doing is subpar or I could be doing it better. And Alvino isn't satisfied until he's got really solid bass parts down, can play confidently along with Dave, and then has good lyrics to go over everything. So the process to like finishing a song, it can be pretty quick sometimes, but most of the time I would say it's a process. It takes a couple weeks to make sure everything is solidified, maybe even longer.
And is this done at all at home and then people come back with ideas like, okay, we recorded this practice, everyone is going to go listen to the song and then show up with new ideas, or is it all done collaboratively at the next practice session?
Both, definitely. We'll we all take those videos home. We all listen to everything. And then, we're all pretty in tune with what each other hears too. We all have kind of like the same things when it comes to hearing what we like and don't like. And so Dave will like go home and he'll be like listening to it and he'll actually sometimes change the riff and come in and be like, song structure's the same. This riff is different. This is what I'm doing. And then I'll listen and I'll be like, didn't like that drum part. This is what I'm going to try instead there and see if it works. And then Alvino, it's always a balance between, I want vocals here. I don't want vocals here. And then, it's like, Dave's like, well, I don't want vocals here, but I want it here. And I'm just like, yeah, great.
You guys can figure that one out. Yeah, you guys can figure that one out.
I mean, vocal placement's really important for sure. And I like to give my 2 cents when I can, but we're all pretty much on the same page. And Alvino's pretty damn good at it too.
Yeah. And so in terms of you as a drummer, then, do you have ways that you practice this, I guess, like improvisational skill independent of just going to band practice? Like, are you, trying to figure out like, okay, I need to get better at improvising fills in a certain way, or I need to be able to get better at coming up with beats on the fly? Or is it just kind of like, I'm going to show up and we're going to see what happens and I'm going to build from there?
A lot of it is, our band space is it's about 30 minutes away from my house downtown, and it's the same band space we've had forever, but it's a little hard for me to go to whenever I want to like just go jam by myself. And so what I'll do a lot of times is I'll listen to records that I really like, will draw inspiration from, which always changes, right? And I'll be like, this is the kind of style fill or intro I want to do, and I will go back to practice having those ideas in my head, knowing the riffs and knowing where I can put them in. I'm really good at like kind of visualizing where I want it to go and what I want it to sound like. Then I'll go in and then I'll just practice it over it, and that's kind of how that works. I have like drum pads at home too that I wish I had a little bit more time for. But I tend to, we practice, once a week, if not twice. And so, I'm practicing pretty often with them and all together too. So a lot of opportunities to get things nailed down.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned that your specific drum influences are always changing. Anything come to mind for recent things that have tickled your fancy, so to speak?
Well, one thing that, I've always like drawn inspiration from, in the sense where it's like, all right, this is like my goal to beat is Dead Congregation always. just because it's a really good example of technique, stamina, and speed. Always three things I'm looking to improve. Speed is really important, but speed isn't as important as having technique, in my opinion. And so working on the technique and understanding how that technique builds to speed is something that I'm continually working on. And then also, like, I've been listening to a lot of funeral doom lately. And so I will draw a lot of inspiration from how to do slow parts better, because fast parts are really easy for me. They come really quick. Slow parts are a challenge because you have more space, and how you use that space is, I think, almost more important than drumming fast, because it's got to be interesting, creative, and kind of drive the song along. I hate boring drumming, so I'm always trying to steer clear of that.
Yeah, and with the slow parts, it's really easy to overdo it because you have so much space, right? And so it's like, oh, I don't want to be boring. I better like do something weird right here. And that's like, wait, just kidding. Now I just did a bunch of crazy stuff, and that's not appropriate.
Exactly. Yeah, you always have to like find that balance, which is a struggle, I think. But it's good to challenge yourself in that way, I think.
Yeah. Anything that you've picked up from the funeral doomsters?
I've been trying to get a lot better at utilizing double bass drum parts in spaces in between hits during slow parts, something that's really important to me. And then a little bit of like off time hits as well, that I think I'm getting a lot better at, that I think is interesting, without being over the top.
Yeah.
If it's, if you're not doing it all the time.
Yeah, sure. Totally. Yeah. You're not just showing off. So you mentioned differentiating speed and technique, which, I mean, I think intuitively makes sense a little bit, right? That technique is, let's say, speed is an outgrowth of technique, right? If your technique is sound, you can probably play faster, but totally. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what do you actually mean by differentiating those?
So what I really mean by that is, when I'm working on technique, something that really helped me is learning how to relax when I'm playing, specifically like in your shoulders and from your knees down. Those two areas have like really improved my drumming. So if I'm more relaxed at my shoulders, then more power is going to come from my elbow and my wrists whenever I'm hitting the drum, and I'll actually be able to get like 2 or 3 strokes out of a hit if I'm going really fast, or I'll be able to really nail every note in a fill when I'm kind of doing everything in sync. And this is the same with my feet as well. I'm trying to get more power out of my ankles and using like kind of like a downward motion, but then also getting like 2 or 3 strokes out of each foot at the same time. So kind of in like one fell swoop. Is a way that like I've really been working on my technique. And then it's also as simple as like, holding the drumsticks in different ways too. Like kind of having them positioned in a slightly different way than I normally would if I'm doing like a fast blast beat, which is also kind of hard to explain without like actually showing.
Yeah, totally. Well, no, I mean, I understand, right? Like as a guitarist, one of the things that you learn is like, oh, I have to hold the pick this way to play this kind of part, and I have to hold the pick that way to play that kind of part.
Totally.
And that, there's just a lot of little micro adjustments like that some of them you're conscious of and some of them you're not conscious of, but it's part of just like practicing is acquiring all those little adjustments and being able to deploy them effectively, I guess.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Some of them don't even make sense, but they work.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I guess for you then, I mean, you mentioned that you guys are practicing somewhat frequently and you also have the drum pads at home. Are you dedicating specific time to like, I'm going to work on this technique, or is it just something that you try to remain conscious of, throughout your normal practice routines and your like band practices?
I actually go into practice thinking like I'm going to be conscious of trying something new, and then I will also implement it while I'm there. While I'm getting warmed up, I'll be trying to warm up using these exercises, or I'll try to utilize them more effectively when we're practicing to see if that makes writing a little bit easier, or if it presents any like new challenges, or something cool happens.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. So Denver in general is kind of killing it with a bunch of really good bands. spoke with Ethan from Primitive Man on this podcast
Yeah.
a few months ago as well. Their new record is awesome. Played with Spectral Voice a bunch of times, and they have several fantastic releases. So what's the vibe like in Denver? I mean, for posterity's sake, we're recording this in January 2021, still amidst the COVID pandemic. I guess I'm just curious how folks have been reacting to the situation there. Like, is there, like people are antsy to get back out there? Are bands still practicing? What's going on?
I wish I'd been able to see everybody.
Yeah.
All of us have really just been holed up this whole time. We still keep in touch with everybody, who is involved in the music scene out here. We're all still talking with each other. I think our main source of interaction has just been Instagram for coming up on a year, which is crazy to think about. But I think a lot of other people are handling it, as well as anyone else. We're still getting, together for practice, but our groups have become a lot smaller because of that, right? So it's like the people that I can count on seeing are my coworkers, my roommates and girlfriend, and my bandmates, and outside of that, that's it. So I imagine it's the same for everybody else here too. They're just like, we still have things to do, like it's, we've been taking some time off from practicing just to be safe, because, it was pretty bad here in Denver not that long ago. It's still pretty bad, but it's getting a little bit better. And, all of us have been, just taking the necessary precautions to make sure that we can still see each other and not get each other sick. And then, do what we love, just get back at it. I've seen everybody else in Denver pretty much do the same thing too. I don't know how much Primitive Man has been getting together lately, but I do know that Ethan's been practicing with his other bands right now too. They've been working on stuff as well, and they're just keeping to themselves, staying safe, trying not to get anybody else sick. I mean, it's hard. I guess it's hard to say. All of us want to play shows. All of us miss touring. When you really look at it, Denver has a lot to offer. There's a lot of bands in Denver right now, and it's cool that it's become this hub for creativity. And I would say, like almost every band I know in Denver has blown up in the past couple of years. It's great to be able to like share the stage with like so many other bands who are just killing it. We're all different in our own ways. So it's even better because we all kind of have our main crowds, which all share members. And then we have like, other people who come to like each people's shows too. We all support each other, which is great. I'm looking forward to doing that again. I miss it a lot. It's been over a year since A Feather and Bone has played a show, which is wild to think about. We've never gone this long without playing. So antsy to get back on the road, absolutely. But I'm trying to use this time, and I imagine other bands are too, to just like work on new material and envision what comes next.
Yeah, for sure. I really do like, as you mentioned, that all these bands from Denver, there's certainly threads tying folks together as far as like sharing members, or like, okay, you can kind of hear that maybe some of these people have similar interests and enjoy similar bands, but it's not like there's a Denver sound, right? It's not like, oh, all these bands are clearly all influenced by this Incantation record, or all these bands are, playing the same kind of like doom or whatever,
different flavors.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's awesome. Is there any bands that are maybe not as well known outside of Denver that you think are underappreciated?
I think, underappreciated is hard because I feel like every band I know out here is just been like killing it, and putting themselves out there too outside of Denver. There's that band, they're partially from here, partially from Minneapolis, but Suffering Hour has been killing it too. And I know that they're getting a lot of recognition. They have a record that's going to be coming out on Profound Lore. And they definitely deserve all the praise. They're some of the nicest people I've ever met. There's a couple other bands. I can't think of like all of them at the moment, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't heard Suffering Hour, so I'll have to put that in the old playlist to listen to.
Definitely.
But yeah, I do think that the dynamics of a scene are so valuable. right? Being in Chicago, I've sort of seen scenes, very a little double, a little bit of wordplay there. I've seen scenes kind of like rise and fall, so to speak, right? Where at times there's a really good vibe and there's a lot of different bands and bands are supporting each other and people are coming to shows. And then that results in a lot of creativity, right? That like the bands that are successful are able to then provide an audience for bands that are less successful. People in the audience are excited about the idea of playing in a band. And so a new crop of bands forms and it sort of creates like a self-perpetuating cycle. And then I've seen that fall off simultaneously. Yeah. Well, not simultaneously, but later on, right? And it's like, oh, no one's coming to shows. It's hard to get bands to want to do things together. People don't seem to be putting down the ladder for other people that don't have an audience or whatever, and it just kind of like feels stuck. And then it starts to come back again. So I guess I'm curious what, is this something that has long been like a positive vibes within Denver that is kind of like built up and that other people have started to notice? Or is this like, oh, wow, like all of a sudden this just kind of coalesced together?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, because there's definitely been an ebb and flow in Denver here as well. Simultaneously, while we've had this big, kind of uptick in metal the past couple of years, there's also been a lot of other music that's like kind of come and gone and then kind of came again. And, Denver's always had a bit of a punk hardcore scene that got, it got pretty big for a while, more within like the punk hardcore realm. And then it kind of died off a little bit, but then it's coming again because there's a lot of younger kids who are getting into it and starting multitudes of bands, and they've got the drive and the energy, and they're killing it. And I think that the metal scene, or the heavier music metal scene here, has been kind of like forming for a long time. I think that it started out like pretty quiet. Spectra Voice has been practicing for, as far back as I think, I remember talking to Eli about his practices that they were doing back in like 2013, 14. So, they've been doing it for a long time, and it's been a steady incline, and then same with Blood Incantation and Primitive Man, of course. Primitive Man has been working at it for forever, and that, includes like Ethan and his various other projects he's done leading up to it, which have always been successful too. So it's like the timing was just right for all of it to kind of come together, I think. And then you've got bands now like Oryx and Casket Huffer, who are also on that list of bands that are, I think that they've been up and coming for a while now too, and they're great. They're wonderful people. They always show up. They always support. They're always down to play shows, and they're always like great to be around.
Wait, quick question. So Casket Huffer is from Denver?
I think so.
Oh, interesting. I thought they were a Dakotas band because we were actually on the same label as them.
Oh wait, hold on. Let me see.
We can fact check that.
Okay, so they're from Cheyenne. So that's the thing. I always get them kind of mixed in there because they're so close to Denver.
We're all wrong then.
Yeah, we're all wrong. Yeah, they're really close. So it feels like they're a part of Denver. I've seen them several times, and they're always great people too.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, no, that Casket Huffer record that came out, I don't remember when it actually came out, but their most recent one is really solid as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember they were one of the last bands that I saw before all of the pandemic stuff hit.
Yeah, totally. So I want to also ask you about some of your side project stuff. So, you've been locked down, but creating a bunch of music, I guess, right? So what's going on with Volunteer Coroner?
Yeah, so that Volunteer Coroner is kind of like my ambient noise project that I've been doing for a little over 2 years now. And it just started very, very rudimentary, just with some, Korg Volcas and some really bad microphones. And it was just an exploration of just making experimental music. I've always been into experimental, electronic ambient noise music. And, I liked it so much that it just kind of felt natural for me to try to make some of my own. And so after doing that for a while, I started to kind of find like a stride, things I really liked and wanted to do with that project. And one of my good friends here, his name is Brandon. He is in this band Vermin Womb with Ethan, coincidentally. He has, been making some sort of industrial like noise music since roughly around the same time I was, and we kind of linked up and started like sharing our stuff with each other. And then the mutual interest just kind of grew into this little label that we have now called Trust Collective. So it's basically just an outlet for different kinds of experimental and electronic music.
Yeah. What do you think the crossover is between that kind of like more chill ambient vibes and then harsher noise and then death metal, right? Because I mean, I think that, for people who are interested in that stuff, it kind of makes sense that those are connected. But for other people, those seem like all extremely different things for someone to be into.
Yeah, no, it is kind of funny, but I think that if you really think about it, like metal is like very theatric, it's a production. And I've always kind of thought of like ambient music kind of going hand in hand with that. I mean, like how many metal records have you picked up where you have this kind of like creepy ambient like interlude, and then you've got like some noise happening in there too, these like kind of creepy like dungeon sounds, that's kind of where a lot of this kind of came from for me. It's like, oh, I really like that, I want to explore it. And so to me, they all kind of go hand in hand, it's thematic. It's interesting. It's got this kind of like, cinematic quality to it. Kind of how death metal can have this kind of like horror feel to it. I love it.
Yeah. You can go back to like Mayhem's first EP with the Morton Subotnick intro, right? And that's like, yeah. People were making that connection from the mid 80s. And sometimes I wonder like how much of that is just, people saw Mayhem do that and then kind of also wanted to do that. And then how much there is some sort of like part of people's brains that makes them like both styles of music, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It is really interesting. I remember reading about Euronymous' interests in like ambient music and just being called a poser for it. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that there is an element, I guess it depends on what style of metal you're playing, right? But especially in black metal, but within some death metal stuff as well, the kind of like blast beats and the tremolo picking create very much like a almost arrhythmic, like wall of noise type of situation.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
It's very similar to a lot of ambient stuff and to a lot of like harsher power electronics or noise where it's just like, this is a wall of sound that's going to make you feel a certain way. Oh, totally. Yeah. I love it. That's like one of my favorite things about harsh noise too. It's, a lot of people are just like, I don't know how you listen to that, sometimes Dave and Albino included, but they also understand it, like, it's just one of those things where you find something and I really appreciate process. I really appreciate ways of execution. And I find that in those styles of music all the time, just because it sounds like maybe TV static to someone doesn't mean that there wasn't some sort of artistry behind it. And it's similar to like death metal too, like you can tell when something isn't genuine. I think that goes for any type of genre out there. And you could really tell when you're listening to some noise music that's just not genuine. It's just noise for the sake of noise, It's like, we don't need any more of this. Yeah. What when you drive, you put on some horrible shrieking grinding noise or whatever, and they're like, dude, come on, man, like you gotta turn that off. Well, thankfully I drive alone most of the time, and my girlfriend has an appreciation for it too, which is awesome. But for instance, I've been working through this 20 CD box set from this project called Skin Crime that I just put in my car, just listened to, and it's like just over 24 hours of like scrape metal noises. Yeah. By these guys who've been doing it since like the 80s, and it's just like, oh man, this is sick, but it also just sounds like I'm listening to a junkyard. Yeah. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious. I mean, it sounds like you mentioned that you have an appreciation for the like the process and execution of actually creating whatever those soundscapes, selecting the sounds and actually crafting something from what would otherwise just be, the sounds of a junkyard or whatever.
Totally.
For someone who's maybe interested but doesn't have the appreciation for what's actually going on with some of that stuff, is there any way that you can try to explain like how to get a foothold and how to hear that stuff?
Yeah, totally. I think that, I guess I'll back up a little bit here too, because it wasn't always where I appreciated like harsh noise, for example. And I use that as like just something that seems really hard to get for people, but for me, it started out with listening to a lot of like ambient music. And then, when you're listening to ambient music, I really learned to appreciate layers. I really learned to appreciate effects, and also like the lack of a clear song structure, but also a direction to where it's not just like endless loops. There's like some sort of like story going on. There's something happening that kind of moves the whole narrative forward. That's really how I got into it. And then once that happened, there's a lot of ambient music that has a lot of these like kind of like feedback tones from, like maybe just the microphones, or maybe from, the way that somebody has something set up. Maybe they're using some old equipment that just feeds back like crazy, but mixed in with like this kind of ambient sound. It's nice. It's kind of a contrast, but you get kind of lost in it, And then when you start to listen to more like harsh noise music, the things that I really always tend to pick up on are like layers, saturation, and then there's always like effects like panning, like who would think to pan a noise track? But if you like add these kind of like subtle variations in there, right, paired with some like really unique visuals, that's also important, I think. And some idea, when you're going into it, I think that you can really start to like appreciate what's happening. And you can really start to understand like, cool, like this is hard to listen to, but like it's a cool concept, and it's like interesting how they made like this sound, with like this unconventional thing. It's kind of like the Dada of music, It's just like, it doesn't matter. You just do whatever you want. Anything's music. It's kind of sick in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you mentioned the idea of maybe starting with something more ambient and then kind of understanding how to appreciate more harsher sounds from there. Do you have a recommendation of some ambient stuff that you found is like a good, let's call it gateway to noise?
A good gateway. Yeah. For me, this was back in like, I don't know, it was about 2015, 2014-ish area for me. The experimental label Posh Isolation from Copenhagen really got me into a lot of it. With I would say, projects like Vanity Productions really helped kind of like shape the kind of stuff I would later get into. It has a lot of those like softer like synth tones, but actually has like some like feedback and like some interesting kind of things and like textures happening. I think Posh Isolation is a great label to check out if you're looking for any sort of like that kind of music to start getting into. I would definitely recommend like the earlier part of the catalog where things were definitely more experimental. And then from there, like I'm like looking around this like giant wall of tapes I have. I think that another label that I think is really cool too, that people should check out is it's called Total Black from Berlin. And this guy Brett runs it, and he has a ton of great music varying from like, softer ambient to like more industrial harsh noise, and the catalog's vast. I think you could pick any release there and kind of just start and to explore for yourself. But those are definitely like some labels I would check out. Give them your support. Check out labels and artists on other labels. From there, use those as like a jumping off point.
Yeah, I think that the stuff you mentioned earlier as well about, I mean, most music is essentially creating an expectation and then either satisfying that expectation or violating it.
Yeah.
Right? That's sort of how people process music. And, some stuff it's easy to understand what's going on enough to have an expectation that can then create the pleasure of having it fulfilled, or the shock at having it violated and then the pleasure at having it fulfilled again later.
Yeah.
And it can be a bit opaque with, ambient music or noise or whatever, because people don't have the vocabulary to understand what's going on. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of ways to play with textures, to play with layers. I mean, clever stuff like panning things to different speakers, and that there is an element of once you have enough understanding of the vocabulary of how people are actually creating soundscapes or whatever, that there's a lot that can be manipulated there beyond just like, verse, chorus, bridge, and then like final outro chorus.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I mean, also when you're tired of listening to just regular music, just turn on some weird shit.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people when they're, working or studying or whatever, that they put on whatever the Spotify like vocal list playlist or whatever.
Oh yeah, like the lo-fi beats to like chill and study to.
Yeah, you know what? You can graduate from lo-fi beats to some, horrifying prurient record, and
yeah, let's do that.
Destroy your eardrums.
Let's do it.
That's
Love
awesome.
it.
So what's next for A Feather and Bone? What's next for Volunteer Coroner? What's next for the label? What's the plan?
Well, so right now, A Feather and Bone is just where we always like to move forward. So we're we're trying to work on writing some new material here. When and where that'll materialize, we don't know. But it's something that we've got on the calendar. We're starting to write, and hopefully we'll have something to show for it sooner or later. I think that once like touring starts again, we're just going to try to get back out there as soon as possible. I mean, we all live for that, so that's definitely at the top of our list. As far as like Volunteer Coroner, I am about to release a full length on Trust Collective, probably within the next month or so. And it'll be released on Bandcamp, and then we'll also have like physical copies from there as well. And then I have another tape that's coming out later this year on this label from the UK called Outsider Arts. Great guy runs that wonderful label, and then a couple compilations, and then we'll kind of go from there. At any point, I'm working on like 4 or 5 things.
Yeah. So once you get stuck on one, then you can just pick another one off the shelf and
exactly
keep making something.
Yeah. So it's never ending, but it doesn't have any doesn't show signs of slowing down. So that's what's happening. And yeah, Trust Collective's just chugging along. That new release that I'll be doing will be a part of our next update, which should be happening within the next month or so. So we're just waiting on a couple of things to fall into place, and then it'll be done.
Yeah, beautiful. And if people want to keep up with that stuff, what should they do?
So we
go to a website, or what do they do? So
we don't really have much in the way of an online presence by design. I have an Instagram. It's at @v_coroner, and that is where I post all of the Trust Collective updates. Other than that, trustcollective.bandcamp.com also is where we upload all of the new releases as well. So those are the two main places to kind of keep a lookout for. It's pretty rudimentary at the moment.
Sure. Love it. The mysterious noise artists, can't be having a content calendar if you're a noise artist.
You just can't, it's just, It shows up, and then if you're there, you're there.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, the best thing to do would be to send it to one of your friends who also likes podcasts. If you want more, I have an email list where I send out a weekly update with all the podcasts I've recorded and articles that I've written. I also include my favorite things that I've been reading or listening to as well. You can sign up for that at www.toddneve.com. That's I before E. Or you can open up the show notes in your podcast player and click the link in there.